So I'm going to do something now that I don't normally do. And I'm going to pause right here and give you an example from my own personal life and why I'm so passionate about this piece of armor. Why this necklace that I wear around my neck has a shield with verses 11 through 17 inscribed on it. And why these verses have become my life verses. It's my testimony, and it's a real, true example of modern day faith. A little over 2 years ago, my wife and I were pregnant with our second child. We already had one beautiful little girl that lit up our world. But here we are, pregnant with our second. We're going through the motions of doing the checkups, the monthly exams, all of the things we had already done with our little girl. Then it comes time for the anatomy scan appointment. The big one, the one where they say if you're having a boy or a girl, yeah, that one. So, here we go. I'm unfortunately at work, so I couldn't be there. But my wife and my little girl go together. She's sending me messages with pictures from the ultrasounds and what the tech is telling her. And all I truly care about was, one, are they healthy? And two, is it a boy? Turns out it was a boy. I was pumped. I was getting the best of both worlds. A little girl that I can treat like a princess, and a son that I can raise up to be a man of integrity and to pass along the family name. But then things take a weird turn. She stopped messaging me, but I didn't think anything of it really, because I knew she was probably busy with the doctor, talking about everything that was found. A few minutes later, I get a phone call from one of my supervisors. I remember the words as if it were yesterday. Mr. Johnson, you need to call your wife. She called and said that she needed to talk to you. She sounded upset. Instantly, I got this bad feeling in my stomach. So I immediately finished up what I was doing and called her as soon as I could. When she picked up, I could hear the fear in her voice. She said, "Chris, something is wrong with Tucker." The doctor wouldn't tell me much other than that he had too much fluid on his brain, and she was sending me to a consult with the high-risk clinic tomorrow. Instantly, I felt my face turn white as a ghost. To say I was confused and worried was a huge understatement. So many emotions and questions flooded over me, and it was plain as day. So much so that my supervisor noticed it and asked me what was wrong. I didn't tell him much other than my wife had given me some bad news about the baby. Instantly, he sent me home for the rest of the day to be with her. I get home, my wife is in tears, I'm in tears. We were all a huge blubbering mess. I don't think we slept at all that night. The next day comes, and we get to our appointment with the high-risk clinic. The doctor comes in after all of the initial stuff is done by the nurses, and the only thing that I remember thinking is, please God, just let him give us an answer. The doctor told us about what he saw on Tucker's scans and informed us that Tucker would be born with spina bifida. I stood in shock. Once the doctor finished with what he found, I immediately wanted to know what our options were. My wife and I made it very clear that termination was out of the question, so we wanted to know what else we could do. All we got initially was that we would have to visit the office more frequently to see how his condition developed, and that a series of tests would need to be ran. So we left that appointment feeling relieved that we finally got an answer, but still in shock from finding out about his condition. Fast forward a couple months and a couple more appointments, and the doctor explains to my wife and I about this surgery we could do in utero that would increase Tucker's chances of his condition having very minimal effect on him after he was born. So we ask about what everything entails and what exactly is involved in this surgery, all the specifics. So then we had a choice to make. Do we try the surgery to give him the best shot at life that we as his parents could possibly give him? Or do we not do the surgery and let him be born however he develops? After numerous trips to UNC, numerous tests being ran, numerous consults with other doctors that would be involved in his care, we ended up deciding that we were going to do the surgery because we didn't want to regret not at least trying to give him the best possible outcome. I mean, honestly, what parent doesn't want the absolute best for their child, right? So we finally had a plan. We felt good about it. We finally felt a little bit like everything was going to be okay. Until it wasn't. There was one final test that my wife had to have done, an amniocentesis, before the surgery, and as usual, I had to be at work while she was at the appointment with her mom. Again, I'm at work and I get another call from my supervisor. Mr. Johnson, call your wife. My heart sank. It was all too familiar. Like before, I finished up what I was doing and called her immediately. She told me that she felt like something went wrong with the test. She's going through the details of what happened and that it hurt more than what they told her it would. So I'm already thinking the worst possible outcome. But then she tells me something that enraged me. She told me that the person who performed the test wasn't the doctor that we had been that we had been having all these appointments with. It was his resident. The emotions that flowed through me after hearing that, I can't even begin to describe to you. But I knew that I had to do what I could to be a firm foundation for my wife and set all of my emotions aside and suffer in silence. Not long after that appointment, it was a little bit after dinner time, my wife got an extremely sharp pain in her belly, specifically where the needle had been placed for that test. So without hesitation, we load up and I rush her to UNC. When we get there, we explain to them what was going on, what we had already done test-wise, what his condition was, etc. The doctors went to work trying to find out what was causing her pain. I couldn't do anything but stand by and watch her being hooked up to all these machines and monitors and have all these lines being ran from her arms. And as the night progressed, her pain kept getting worse and worse. So they finally admitted her and got us into a room. The doctor had told us earlier that it was a good possibility that Tucker would be born that night, but they would do everything that they could to keep that from happening. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I stood right beside her, doing everything I could to comfort her as she was screaming in pain for hours. I had never felt so helpless and hopeless in all of my life. I remember asking God to send us a miracle to heal Tucker and to get us out of this nightmare. Around 5 a.m. that very next morning, my wife's water broke. At that moment, I knew I had my answer. I felt so numb, so desperate, so lifeless. My heart felt like it had been ripped right out of my chest. I knew in that moment that my son would not make it. Around 9 a.m., he was born. The nurses took him to the next room over to wrap him in his blankets and keep him there until I could get my wife taken care of. And once she was finally somewhat squared away, it was time for me to go see my boy. At first I was reluctant because I knew he wouldn't even know that I was there. But I knew I had to do it. As his dad, I owed him everything. So the nurse walked me over to the next room. And before I even made it through the threshold, the tears I had been fighting back for hours finally rushed out of my eyes like a waterfall. So much that I fell to my knees beside his bassinet, wailing, "I'm sorry, baby boy. Daddy is so sorry. I love you more than anything and more than you will ever know." And once I got myself somewhat together, I asked the nurse if I could hold him. She picked him up and handed him to me. And I just stood there holding him, my heart breaking with every single beat. I didn't know what else to say or what else to do but to just hold him and cry. So that's what I did. A few days later, it was time for us to be discharged from the hospital. My wife and I were both extremely exhausted, not only from the lack of sleep, but also from all the influx of emotions that we had just experienced over the last few days. Up until discharge day, my wife had yet to hold Tucker at all. She didn't say it, but I knew she was blaming herself for him not surviving. However, before we went home, I finally convinced her to hold him while she had the chance, so that she wouldn't regret it for the rest of her life. So she finally built up enough courage and strength to hold him. To watch her with him was absolutely heartbreaking. So we finally gave him back to the nurse, and we finalized our discharge, knowing that was the last time we would ever get to hold him or see him again. It was a bittersweet day, to say the least. So that's Tucker's story. But you may wonder, what in the world does it have to do with the lesson? Because God taught me something. He taught me that no matter how hard life gets, He has a plan and a purpose for everything. It may be something that I didn't understand at the time, but I kept my faith and trust in Him to bring me out of that deep, dark valley that I had just walked through. Was I mad? I'd be lying to say that I wasn't. Was I confused? Absolutely. Did I question God? More than once. But then guess what happened just a short time later on? God answered my questions. I was reading through some devotionals on hope and faith when Ephesians 6:10 through 17 was the passage of scripture that the devotion was based off of. Can you guess what part stuck out to me the most? Yep, the shield. Because in that moment I knew that not only was God protecting me from the devil and this giant of unbelief that stood in front of me, but that He was also revealing to me that He was the shield that protected me and helped me out of the valley, all because I kept my faith and trust in Him and what His Word says. So that's how these verses became my life verses. That's why I wear it around my neck. That's why I was blown away when I read the story in Daniel and truly studied the correlation to the lesson for this week. I was truly amazed at what God had taught me. Thank you for listening. And remember, when you're in the valley, don't give up on your faith and don't give up on God. Take it from someone who knows how good He really can be. Now, if you stop the lesson to listen to this story, head back over to the lesson and finish it up. If you listen to this afterward, I hope to see you all again next week. Until then, God bless you guys, and good night.